So great. Me back. There we go. So hello everybody. So welcome to an introduction to malware analysis and triage. So people have, I've talked at a couple of the meetings before. This is really a kind of 101, kind of an introduction to this topic here. If we have time, I might go deeper. We'll see how the schedule works out here. The obligatory about me slide for as much as anyone cares about these. I'm Ben Mason. I'm a technical architect at CDW. Work a lot in service development in the security realm for all of our security services that we provide, both our information security type of services and our network security type of services. So I cover kind of a large swath. Uh, I've been around a while. I'm an OSCP. I'm a CCIE. That's my Twitter if you need to track me down later, or in the future when we have in-person meetings, you can find me at most of the security meetups in town, and that's a link to my website where the slides from tonight will be posted also, and if the recording's any good, I'll probably link it there also. So I think a lot of the people here probably already know what malware is. But in short, it's malicious software. It's stuff that does bad things to computers. Um, and it comes in many categories and types. And they all kind of have different roles that you'll see out there. One that's really big in the news, as we all know, is ransomware. Give me Bitcoin, you get your data back. But a lot of the really kind of interesting ones to me are those intermediate ones, like the launchers, the downloaders, the things that really hide the big bad payloads, and how basically malware hides out there in the wild. Like those are kind of some of the main methods out there that malware hides, is really different levels, different layers of obfuscation in the wild there. But on top of the various categories that do different things, malware comes in families, and that sometimes to some people a very confusing set of things. And really it is, it's just different forked code sets out there. So there's different versions of Emotet. They come from the same place, but they may be obscured differently. They may have new or different functionality, or just have been forked to do evasion of various antivirus products. And so you'll see a lot with some of the kind of tools out there that say, oh, it's a emotet dot something dot whatever version, and it kind of shows you the different the life cycle of that code base of malware out there. A fun aside here, when looking up virus in Giphy these days, there is a lot of really great options out there for GIFs that include basic visualizations of the COVID virus, and this was kind of the best one I found when I was just taking a quick look at the options that are out there. At least I found it pretty funny. So why why do people do this and investigate malware like this? There's so many different reasons. From a business perspective, a lot of people do this investigation to figure out, what happened to the network, how did it go out, what did it touch, what things did it encrypt in a ransomware perspective, or how did it propagate throughout the network? Really a lot of incident response needs. Where did the files end up? What did it touch? How did it get there? How do I clean up this mess that's in front of me now? That's definitely one of the one of the reasons. On the proactive side, looking for indicators of compromise. You get a malware sample, you want to figure out, what is it doing, what did it do, or what could it do? So you can throw it in your SIM products, you can throw it in your endpoint protection products like an EDR product or something along those lines, so that you can help protect your environment or your customers' environments, depending on the kind of environment you're in. Another reason, which is really my main motivator, as I said up front, a lot of my job is around service development. Um, so I do a lot of business work. I play in some technology, but I have a lot of engineers that help me with some of that work. So I'm on the upper end of things to flex my muscles in this space. I have a lot of curiosity, and so that's kind of where a lot of my reverse engineering and malware work kind of comes from, is my inherent curiosity in how things work. Um, and so that's kind of a lot of my motivation behind this kind of work. Um, so, anyone have any thoughts or questions on where I presented so far? I mean, I think it's a lot of really kind of straightforward things about my work, but if anyone has any questions before I kind of dive in a little bit deeper.
Perfect so far.
So once we get into kind of doing this triage and investigation, really you got to start to look at building out an environment. We're working in software or in pieces of software that do bad things. If you run it, you're going backwards potentially on your production systems. So the first things first when doing this kind of triage is you want to build a safe environment where you can break and recreate over and over again as you run various pieces of malware. So virtualization is our friend. Lots of great options out there. I use and have used both VirtualBox and since I'm a Mac person, VMware Fusion is kind of where I'm at also. One of the kind of main things you got to have in this environment, once you get what you're working on that device, you got to isolate it. Um, I often will disconnect the network and any kind of mapped drives so that when if I want to run a piece of software to see what happens, it stays within that virtual machine. There's concerns you can have out there about VM escape, and you hear about all the really kind of horrific versions of that. Um, it's not the norm, but it's an option out there. It's probably not going to be the case for 99% of the samples most people see. Most samples people see that are virtualization aware really just don't run in VMs, so that people doing what I'm talking about today uh, aren't able to or aren't easily able to see what's going on with that piece of malware. Um, to build out this kind of environment, there's many options. You can take a look at, there's some libraries in Linux to help take apart like Windows binaries, but really it's easiest to do it in a Windows VM. Um, and you don't always need a individual Windows license for every investigation environment. One of the ones that I'll be using, kind of demonstrating today, uh, uses the link right now. It's a developer network Microsoft Edge VM that is meant for developers to test software using Microsoft Edge in different versions of browsers. But it works pretty well for what we need here. It's a 90-day trial period, so you have to refresh it every few days, but every 90 days. But really, if you're doing this kind of work, you're rebuilding it often anyways. And a really simple way to get a lot of the tools that some I'll be showing. There's a lot more on top of it. Flare, which is the Flare VM, which is put out by Mandiant FireEye, is essentially a PowerShell script that um, usually takes about 12 hours for me to run for me, but it takes quite a while to download and deploy a whole suite of tools that you can use to reverse engineer really any software that's usually Windows based, but it can be really any kind of binary out there. And it's essentially run PowerShell script, and it deploys that software and a whole bunch of software onto a Windows machine. It's super useful. Takes forever, but it's installing a whole lot of stuff, and it's a really great contribution out there that Mandiant put out there into the world. As I mentioned, it's easiest to do on a Windows environment, but it's sometimes for safety's sake, I'll look at stuff on my Mac host or a Linux VM. Remnux is a distribution put out by SANS. They use it in some of their trainings. The SANS Grem training specifically, or the training, the Force 610 training that they use for the Grem cert, that is a Linux distribution that they have out there that has a lot of tools for, again, more reverse engineering. It's really based around kind of their malware suite of trainings. It's a really neat distribution. I know I've been kind of following it. They're refreshing it a little bit to like a 7.0 from a 6.0 version, um, and adding and changing around some of the features. But it's a super useful distribution out there. And another couple pro tips kind of along with the environment perspective. When you have a sample, if I get something that has an exe extension or some other executable extension, I usually just rename it to .bin kind of right away, or just put .bin on the end of it, just so I don't hurt myself and run it in a place I don't expect it to run it. And usually when people that are doing research exchange samples, it's done in a .zip format with a password of infected. I was actually downloading a couple samples an hour ago before this because they popped up in my Twitter feed, and they were zip files. They had that same password. And it's a pretty common way if you want to start to look at things and start to play around and look at these samples. Usually you find a lot of zip files with that sort of password put onto them. So this is kind of a fundamental topic in analysis and reverse engineering. There's a couple different ways that you usually go about it. There's static analysis, which is, as it said, you're kind of analyzing a file as it is on disk. So as the file exists and was compiled by a compiler and put on a disk, there has a certain way it's laid out and a certain set of data that's available there. And so you'd use a tool that would open up that file as it is on disk, and then also start to parse it and look at it and pull out have the assembly language as it exists on disk and all the header files it is on disk. There's a lot of great tools to do that. Uh, I was talking with one of the people here as they got on earlier about one of the tools, Ghidra, that I use for that sort of analysis here. There's that and a couple other tools for static analysis that they take it on disk. Can be a lot harder to do a lot of static analysis because you have to read a lot of code essentially and follow the code to understand what it does and how it's doing it, and it takes a lot of cycles. There's scripts and things to help simplify that, but it can be a quite labor-intensive activity if you haven't done it and you don't have a lot of inherent knowledge behind kind of how Windows binaries work and things like that. But it's much safer and it does expose some certain other pieces of data. The easier mode is dynamic analysis, which is really where you're running the program and following how it executes, what it does when it executes, and the different activities that it does during execution. And it kind of really, it leads you through what it's doing for the most part. Again, this can be dangerous unless you set up the proper environment. Again, VMs, snapshots of VMs, being able to roll back. If I'm doing some dynamic analysis using a debugger or something along those lines, I often will run it, have to hit go back in my snapshots a couple steps back, do it again, do it again. It becomes a little bit of trial and error, but you get a lot of intelligence into that, especially if there's different ways of obfuscating code that are really hard to read when you're doing a static analysis. But for this discussion, we are going to talk a lot about some dynamic analysis and some actually relatively easy to use tools to help expedite and speed up some of that initial triage and initial analysis, and help get that idea of what is this, this piece of software do here. If you're looking to get deep into what a piece of malware does, you probably need to use both techniques. I have a series of blog posts I've been writing about a couple samples that I've been reverse engineering, and I have used both techniques. Couple recently is a couple .NET binaries that I got in my spam box that I found particularly interesting, and to figure out how some of the algorithms worked, I definitely had to do some dynamic analysis on them because one of them was obfuscated so much I had to really step through it to find the keys and find the information that was contained within it. So that's kind of a lot of me talking about slides. I really wanted this to be a kind of demo heavy presentation here. Slideware is slideware. There's a few different tools that I kind of want to talk a lot about here. But before I really get into any kind of toolings, any other questions? Anything else that anyone has about what I've talked about so far? Cool. So talking about this kind of list of tools here, there's really the first couple are finding out a little bit about a file that we're going to talk about, die or detected easy, and then a couple of the probably a look at using like PE bears, a couple of tools. When I talk about a PE file or something like that, I probably didn't mention this yet. A PE file, it's a Windows executable. It's a portable executable is what it stands for. Pretty self-explanatory there, but it's essentially a Windows executable, Windows exe file. But there's a multitude of tools to kind of pull out some data from those files, so you get a little bit of intelligence about what the thing is you're looking at. I always start with trying to figure out what is the thing that I'm looking at. Before then I start to dive deeper and then get to the kind of analysis tools and get a little bit more about what that file is. And then we'll run through a couple online tools. VirusTotal, probably, percentage of you have probably seen it or at least heard about what VirusTotal is. Using that to learn about what current AV tools think about a file. And then some online sandboxes that provide some kind of really neat analysis and again, more intelligence about what the thing does and how provide that feedback and understand what an executable does. Let me pop out of here and get over into some web browsers. And close up a couple of things here. So first, we will go over here to my Windows VM here. So as I kind of mentioned, this is a Flare VM instance. It's a Windows 10 box. Some people like to do analysis on Windows 7. Usually, if you're going to be executing a file, sometimes Windows 7 has less protections built into it, so it can be a little more advantageous to use kind of like a Windows 7. Again, we have, obviously we all see a lot of customers don't upgrade, so Windows 7 is still a very, very valid target out there for bad actors. And so it can be useful to use different Windows operating systems. I think my current set of VMs on this box include XP, I have the Remux, a couple Windows 7 VMs. I have a whole array of VMs out there that I work with in various capacities. But it's very kind of having a whole array of them out there. It can be very, very useful. So first, I'm going to pop, hopefully, come on. Thank you. Demo gods are being good so far. I appreciate it. So I'm going to open up Detected Easy or Die. Die is actually cross-platform. I'm doing it on a Windows VM because that was pretty much an easy way of doing it. It also is available for Mac and Linux, which is kind of nice. Again, if you're just trying to get some information, you want to do it in a safe place, having a piece of malware on an environment that it won't execute on can be pretty useful. So first things first, I have this file. I have it named loader.bin. I already know what it is, but if it was just a kind of a random file that I had received or got sent to me or I found on an infected machine. I don't know what it is. I just know it did something bad. You know, we'll have kind of a nondescript name. So load it, plop it in here. And the kind of information I see about this file is first, it's a Windows PE file. Kind of what I expected, kind of, you know, what I thought it would be, but it helps confirm that piece of information. How big it is, how it was compiled, what it was compiled as. So I understand how that code was generated, helps give an idea of where it's coming from. Again, is it a Windows box? If I'm going deep into this file, what tool should I be using? Should I be using um, a decompiler that's meant for doing straight binary analysis, or do I need to go somewhere like is maybe it's a Java file or it's a compiled a Java file that's embedded in the exe file. So I need to think about what Java tooling I might use, or is it Go, or what language could it be? That can be useful for deeper analysis, but it helps give you an idea of where this could go in a lot of places. Um, Imports. What libraries is this thing using? This one doesn't have a whole ton of libraries imported. It has a bunch of calls to a bunch of functions here. Those can help give you an idea of what it does. Like this one, get command line W. It does something with a command line. Interesting information to have. Get you an idea of what this piece of software does. You know, this is something that, again, you're trying to get a lay of the land, get an idea of what this thing does. And then another thing that I look at, and it's always a kind of tough topic, is the entropy of the file. And really what that tells me is how much has this file been obfuscated? When, again, it was compiled, it was put out there, did that actor do something to try and hide a whole bunch of code in this? So what is how is the data distributed in the file? So it's, a lot of times if the data in a file is encrypted, you'll see just kind of at the beginning of the file here, you'll see this kind of, oh, it's a little, you know, lackadaisical like this, and then all the way across, there'll be a flat line. And that usually means it's encrypted. The data there isn't obvious. So that's doing a method called packing, which is where you kind of take the data, like say a file that is the actual binary that is doing the malicious activity, and you encode it, encrypt it, you pack it within another file, you hide it within that file, but it's not necessarily obvious to a lot of tools what's hidden within that file. Just know a lot of kind of rudimentary tools would just say, oh, it's just a program, it does something, but I don't know what, and it looks normal unless it's a tool that's looking for that kind of methodology. So those are a couple things that I would look at kind of starting off, trying to investigate at the initial, what is this piece of code that I have in front of me? So next, I want, is there any questions out there?
So the graph that you showed there, is that showing a lot of changes since that file was first created? Is that high entropy right there, or how does
So
that?
this would be just how the data is laid out in the file.
Okay.
So it's not kind of changes over time. It's how many zeros are in a certain place in the file? Like kind of, is there an even distribution of zeros? Are there kind of normal, or is it literally just a bunch of random? Does it look like a bunch of just random data in the middle of the file? So what we're looking at right here is pretty normal, I would say, for a lot of executable files. Um, Kind of, it just varies. It's a little bit all over the place, but it's not like a consistent flat line from, say, where it starts at 100,000, goes all the way to 40,000.
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't have on hand, I didn't have a good example of a packed binary, but that would be essentially what it would look like. Um, any other questions?
Is this Flare VM? Is this out on GitHub? Can we just download this or?
So it's Flare is essentially a PowerShell script. I'll have the link when I have this. This link will be in the slides when they get distributed. If you have basically you have a Windows image and you just run that PowerShell script and it downloads all the programs. Um, so I have a bunch of preset links here, but we're gonna open up eBear. There's a whole bunch of tools out here that do similar to what PE Bear does, but PE Bear essentially takes a look at the Windows headers. So we'll just let that go up here. So if you're not really familiar with kind of the layout of a Windows executable, um, this is a fun fact I just love. I think it's hilarious in a lot of ways. I have a weird sense of humor, if you can't tell. Um, but at the beginning of every Windows executable file, exe file, there's a DOS header. So you could technically put some DOS code within a Windows file. I just find that really thoroughly amusing. But there's there's an initial header that's a DOS header. And then it goes eventually into the rest of the Windows executable here. But you can see there's a lot of really, and this is kind of a disassembly view, but once you start to get into these different stub headers and kind of the rich information, this is when you can start to see information about checksums, about compilation IDs, and a lot of really deep down information. But then you see there's a flow of some of the very similar information because it's a lot of the same sort of data here. Where is what I'm looking for? Um, so actually, a couple pieces of what a couple pieces that are kind of really useful in a lot of files here is the section headers. So within a file, there's different kind of, you call them containers of data. Like they have different sets of information you hold in there. One of the first that we see here is this text header. And the text, that's actually the code that gets executed in a file. So every little execution line that happens for the most part probably lives in the text side, in the text header here. But you see, that's really, looking at this graph, it's really a tiny, tiny bit of this file. There's not a lot of probably code that is run within this program. But if you look at this section here, the data section, that's huge. That's a lot, from a percentage perspective, that's a whole lot of this file. And kind of what that tells me, there's probably something else hidden in this file. There's something more than what this program normally executes that is hidden within this file. Um, and so that kind of informs me of, hey, I need to think more about what's inside this file and what does it does? Does it pull out? Is this a packed? Is this actually got within it? Is there more data hidden within the data section than is actually normally executed within this file? Um, and then so again, we kind of come back around to this import section. It's a little bit easier to read maybe here, but you can see again the list of imports. And so this is kind of another view, and then you can see again more compilation data. When was this file actually compiled and put out there into the world? So again, there's a whole ton of data in here. Not all of it's necessary to kind of look at on a regular basis, but once you kind of start with the metadata, you start to say, you have all this information here. Kind of helps inform. Again, it's all about information collecting, information gathering, understanding more about what you're looking at and what you want to learn about. So once I kind of really have a lay of this sort of land and start to use these tools to really understand what I'm looking at, I may start to use some other more dynamic tools or other tools to really look at the file here. So I'm gonna plop over to my web browser here, and we're gonna open up VirusTotal. So VirusTotal, really handy tool. If you haven't used it before, it's really kind of a neat way to see what antivirus thinks of various files. So this is that same loader.bin file. If I didn't know, once I understand what it is, I'm like, okay, cool. It's an executable. Let's see what antivirus thinks of it. Well, out of 72 antivirus engines, it says that, oh, it's the Ryerk malware. So pretty straight, it knows basically, for the most part, it's been identified malware, an identified malware file that, well, the vast majority of the antivirus engines know what this file is. So you saw that happen incredibly quickly. VirusTotal really creates a hash of the file, and then it takes that hash and runs it through all the AV programs. So it doesn't really run the file through there. But you can see it gives all the names, and it's a whole list of applications here. Looking at the details again, you see the different file hashes, a lot of the same information we're seeing elsewhere. It's a Windows 32 exe, it's a portable exe file. It has this file size. It was created on these dates and times. You can see in 2008, it was created and then is submitted, well, about a day later. So they weaponized this pretty quickly there. And then a whole different array of the different names of the file. And what you see in some of the reasons that I use multiple tools and look at this in multiple ways is to make sure this data matches. When I have a sample, I want to make sure that what I see on disk matches with what these tools see also. So VirusTool is super handy if you just want a quick hit. Want to know what piece of virus this is. I want to know if it's a known piece of software. A downside to using this tool and some of these other tools I'm looking at with this public information is if it's not a known piece of software, known piece of malware, um, it gets published out to the internet. So if it's someone who is doing a specific attack against, say, your organization and is weaponizing directly at your organization, they now know that you know. And that can be potentially a problem from a response perspective because they can then run away, hide their tracks, and never to be seen again, and you don't know how they got in or what they used. So that can be a problem from a response perspective, but that's a careful balance when you're doing kind of an IR response. If you're just looking to get back up, that's the business decision, then that's where you're at, and that's the actions you have to take. So first of all, pretty simple, pretty easy, has a lot of kind of key useful information. And then obviously with the behavior, it kind of talks a little bit about what it does, but we're going to show a little bit more about what it does when we start to use some of the sandboxing technology. So first, any questions kind of on the VirusTotal or where we're at right now? So this is another neat tool. So there's a couple sandboxing tools that I'm going to talk a little bit about today, and I'm going to give a pseudo real-time version of these. The first one is called AnyRun. It's a really neat little sandbox. It's simple. There's a free demo plan, which is what I use. Again, this is kind of my own research, and I don't have funding to pay for some of the plans. It can get a little expensive over time if you're something that you're just chasing and looking at on your own here. But it basically what it does kind of what I talked about earlier. Take a piece of software that you have, puts it in a VM, and runs it and tracks what it does. So on this interface, this has kind of an initial threat map. It has this, the super cool dashboard kind of stuff that happens out there. You can see, excuse me, some of the samples that other people have uploaded kind of scrolling by here. But I've run a few different samples here. You can see on this left side here are some of the runs that I've done before for this and a couple other options. Um, so I'm going to take load up here, another, again, loader.bin, and you get a track down of what this piece of software data is. This is a kind of version I've run already. It has that whole list of the different steps that it did. But the fun fact is, let me load this up. I have a recording of this run. I could run it multiple times, but then it shows up multiple times in my desktop. So we're going to show kind of an example here. So what I did is I clicked the plus sign in the upper left here to get to where we're at here, and then chose the piece of software. Clicked run. Again, it publishes everything here that that it does. So it takes just a quick minute here. It's amazingly fast of spinning up kind of Windows 7 32-bit VM here. There's more options if you pay, but this really covers a lot of the bits here. So a thing I like to always do when I get started here, it starts off with just running for 1 minute. That's often not enough. So I added a bunch of more time here, and I'll stop moving my mouse. And so you see you saw that build out on the right side of the screen here with a few different steps. And now the CPU spiking up. What's going on here? Again, you kind of think about, okay, it's doing a bunch of stuff, doing a bunch of stuff. And eventually, I think it's going to be about another minute or so, you'll start to see the desktop here get a little different here, because it's actually a view of the desktop of this virtual machine here that it spun up. I always find sandboxes to have such interesting choices of software they put on their desktops. Again, like I'm not sure how many normal users would have FileZilla on their desktop. Or Cache Cleaner. Well, I don't know. I've watched enough scam betas that maybe Cache Cleaner would be kind of a normal thing. Um, but as this kind of builds out, and as I kill time by talking,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, how good is this at, I guess, not being detected as a VM or virtual environment? Because I know some do use a variety of methods, DNS lookups or something, to see if they are in a VM. Uh, how solid is this at not being caught out, I guess I would say?
I would say it's pretty good. I mean, any of these environments are pretty good, and I mean, this is a free version, so the bad actors, uh, they have access to this to try and do some evasion of their own and figure out what's going on in the environment and find new evasion techniques. Um, so
Never perfect, but
exactly. So it does a good enough job. Obviously, this binary here, the Ryuk sample I have here does not have any VM evasion techniques built into it. Um, from my analysis I did outside of this, but either way, Ryuk kind of does the job because it's designed to be run by a human anyways. So the human should know if it's a piece of if it's a VM in the first place. Um, cool. Um, and so as you see, I kind of paused the video here, but you can see there's the Ryuk readme.txt to get popped on the desktop, and then, well, all the files are encrypted. So again, you can see that it encrypted the files, and you can sit here and watch it, which, I know, is sometimes like, I don't know, watching grass grow, but it does the trick and tells you information. On different pieces, different samples, you can also see what network connections it makes. I'll show that example here. It's probably this guy. Yes. So this is a completely different sample. that is an information stealer. In its case, it goes out and connects to the internet and pulls down, sends a TLS encrypted SMTP message to someplace. I haven't done the analysis of that portion of this piece of software yet, but I've seen some other analysis out there that it pulls down some information and sends some information out, probably related in this case. You can see WLAN show profile. It maybe pulls Wi-Fi information and sends it to who knows where. For what reason? I can't say. That's not the kind of intelligence I'm aiming for. Of why I enjoy the challenge of taking apart the software. But this gives a good breakdown of some of the threats and some of the information that it pulls out. And again, this whole presentation is about triage, getting that quick hit, getting that information so you know what it did. This happy to talk to anyone about kind of more in-depth reverse engineering. I've given a talk previously at the local OWASP meetup about that. The slides are actually on my blog if you want to take a look at that. Has a lot of this similar information, not a lot of the same, but I did pull a couple slides because really it's a lot of the same tools that I start from. And so another tool that I've worked with to do a similar analysis, hybrid analysis. So this is a report. I will actually hybrid analysis, pull it up, and their methodology, drag and drop a file in, and it does the analysis. And you basically wait. It takes a little bit of time. I think I ran this one earlier. It's not a lot of time, but this is again that same loader.bin file. Pulls up kind of the original submission name. That wasn't my name of it, obviously. Again, same file same file size. What is in this case? This is CrowdStrike's sandboxing environment. What is their threat score? They run it through VirusTotal also. What is the name? But it gives a whole lot of information about its analysis of this file here. And it looks like I'm behind. Yeah, see, it takes a while for some of the sandboxing data. I obviously put this in quite a while ago, and it still hasn't really done the full sandboxing on this file. I think I actually have a run of it linked out that I can pull up a link otherwise from my email. But again, it pulls out. We already knew pretty much this was malicious. But it gives, again, for that thing you don't know anything about, it helps give you that information, and it gives some risk assessment, helps with the incident response, maps it to MITRE, so that helps save you some of that work also and pull up that information. And so I guess with that was kind of the end of the stuff I had prepared. Any other questions? Anything else that people would like to hear a little bit more about kind of reversing and maybe malware? I'm open to kind of questions. I have more time to sit and chat about the thing that I find really fun these days.
On the report that you're looking at there, that MITRE attack, does that give you details on the vulnerabilities that file is trying to exploit? Does it give you like CVEs specifically?
So this file, for example, doesn't exploit any CVEs.
Okay.
It's so it would not. And a lot of malware, like a lot of the traditional malware that I know that my IR teams are seeing, don't actually exploit any specific vulnerabilities. Other than maybe, actually, I'll take that back. We see a lot of bad actors going after RDP vulnerabilities. But that's mostly a script that goes out, finds a vulnerability, and then someone comes back and does the actual work on the back end. It's kind of very interesting, the automated, again, so I'll give the CDW talk a little bit here and put the CDW hat on you. We do have an incident response team. So if any of your organizations out there do get into trouble and need help responding to some sort of incident, we have $0 retainers, we have paid retainers, but we have a team that is happy to assist you in responding to any kind of security incidents that may occur in your organization. So, to put my CDW hat on, I'm very proud of our team, and we actually had just before this, I was on our internal call with that team where we kind of workshop between both our IR teams, our red team, our penetration testing team, our red teams, and our NetSec teams all collaborate and have a kind of session where there's information sharing, because everyone has a stake in this. It's kind of funny that someone gave a presentation about an incident they responded to, and one of our InfoSec guys was like, "Oh yeah, no, I did that to one of our customers in doing a penetration test." So I used the same tactic that an actual bad actor had used on this specific customer's environment. It was kind of a funny moment in the discussion, kind of, again, learning and seeing and exchanging information. But I know this is the expanded MITRE attack, but again, so from a TTP's perspective, which is I think maybe a different version of the question you asked about kind of CVEs and those sorts of activities, this is kind of the flip side of that. So it's really just more of the techniques and tactics that are being used within this piece of malware as it's being analyzed. So, and that would help, I guess, from a defensive perspective, allow defenders to put in defenses to hide against this. So in this case, this piece of malware does do some process hooking. And well, if you're not running as administrator or system on the machine this is running on, that would mitigate that issue. So I guess from a defensive and mitigation perspective, this does help provide that sort of intelligence. So it's not necessarily as much of the CVE type of versions, which CVEs are nice. CVEs are that fun thing that people exploit, but I think as we all know, a lot of it is just process and procedure on top of tooling that really gets you that defensive placement.
One thing that we're looking at right now is honeypot networks to set up in our environment, and there's a pretty extensive one for higher ed that's out of Duke University. Is there a similar thing on the endpoint side where, in the way that honeypot works, it looks at exploits to a vulnerable system and it kind of builds intelligence based on threat actions to that vulnerable system? Is there anything for like the endpoints that work the same way, that look for kind of heuristics on an endpoint to build out kind of, I guess, telemetry statistics for specific types of files?
So a lot of the newer endpoint detection and response EDR products, I know, like a CrowdStrike, Disclosure CrowdStrike, we're a partner. CD is a partner with a whole bunch of companies, but I've played a lot with CrowdStrike, like Carbon. A lot of those tools, they do, again, cutting through the kind of marketing spiel, but they do some behavioral analysis on what's going on and what a program is doing on a system. Some of them approach it differently from a whitelist blacklist perspective, but there's more to kind of where you're aiming towards. There's a lot more behavioral analysis. Like, this thing is hooking this system call, this privileged system call. That's a thing that shouldn't be happening, and it would essentially kill or quarantine that process that's executing that activity. So a lot of the newer endpoint products do have some level of I think what you're describing.
Yeah, I think the carbon black thing, that's really cool in the fact of it can kind of give you kind of a telemetry graph of, which file was launched, what processes it was accessing, and you get kind of a view of how it got on the machine to begin with. I haven't seen that. I don't know if CrowdStrike has that. We don't use either tool. We use Cylance, but it doesn't have that level of analysis of the telemetry within the system, which is kind of interesting.
A lot of them have different levels of that. I've kind of looked at, I mean, again, I work for a company that touches a lot of the tools. I've also looked at Cisco's AMP for endpoints, which does a similar activity, has some level of that process mapping, but it's not as in depth as a Carbon Black. CrowdStrike does do a lot of that mapping also. So, it's like any tool out there. There's lots of great tools, and they all have different places in different customers' environments, people's environments. Um, and so, we have some customers that use Cylance also and have been comfortable with that as a tool set.
Yeah, I think it's very effective in what it does. I don't think it gives you a lot of detail. I mean, you get kind of a percentage confidence level that it's infected and that's it. And then you have to use these other, like VirusTool or other tools to kind of go in after the fact and look at that file and truly see if it's a false positive or not.
Yeah, I don't have the details in front of me, but I do know that our InfoSec practice has had some fun times with Cylance in evasion techniques that they've worked at. So I'll leave that here at neither here nor there. I don't have a lot of details to provide to give a lot of factual. Um, any other questions out there?
How comfortable did you have to get with some of these, like the tactics and how the malware is actually executing its or executing on the system before you could, I guess, read what a sample was doing and have confidence to feel there. Did you have to get very familiar with like the different techniques that the authors were using, or could you kind of work your way through it from a pretty low information level?
So when going into kind of the more binary reversing side, which I think is kind of what you're asking about there, Curtis,
Yeah.
I learned more about how Windows libraries worked than I did about any of these sorts of methodologies. So I kind of took the approach. Again, I'm kind of weird. Uh, I kind of really started to. I always liked reverse engineering. I started doing reversing on embedded systems. Was kind of where I started. Small computers, easy to read, easier computers to look at. Um, but I realized I want to learn something about Windows, how Windows works. As a consumer, Windows, it's a thing I clicked on for a long time, but how does a Windows operating system function? And so that brought me into malware. I know, kind of weird, a little bit, kind of a weird way to get there, but that's really what got me to understand and actually respect the Windows kernel a lot more as someone who grew up using Linux a lot and being, oh, those Windows people, meh. It brought me in a whole different road and respecting Windows a lot more, especially into how it's structured and how it functions, maybe more so how it functions today. But that's,
Have you found like forensic tools? Like there's the forensic toolkit that's out there that is used, in after incident forensic cases. Do you use any of those tools? Because I mean, I've used that in the past, and it gets pretty granular at the file level to look at hashes and things like that.
so I guess, again, for the kind of work that I'm doing, I have a sample. I'm looking at that discrete sample. Again, on our IR team side, they use a ton of those tools when they're coming into kind of an unknown situation. Um, CAPE, KAPE is kind of what we use for a lot of information gathering. And then there's a whole ton of other tools they use in the back end to start to process registry files, process kind of do that dissection of the collected information to understand more about what was exploited and get the best analysis they can of what was exploited and what the call, how the attacker got in and what they ran. Yes, again, kind of my focus here is really around kind of I have a bad thing. I know it's a bad thing. I know it's a bad thing. How does the bad thing work? And that's kind of more like where my expertise lies in this kind of work here. But understanding that it's a bad thing and how the bad thing is getting that high level of what the bad thing does is why I use these sorts of tools often.
So on some of this malware, do you think it's really possible to really clean a system and have 100% confidence it's clean?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there for a lot of it, again, it depends. It depends on what it does. If I'm looking at, again, we're looking at a ransomware sample. What I've been kind of using as my example this entire time. Um, I will retract that statement slightly, and here's how I will. If let's say it's a piece of malware, it's a downloader. It downloads its second stage from some site on the internet, runs that second stage, then deletes it. If you're unable to get a copy of that second stage through one of these analysis mechanisms or some sort of mechanism, yeah, you don't know what it does. You have no way of knowing if you were able to remove the remnants of what occurred on that system. That's very true. It gets a lot harder when you start about like bootkits and rootkits and things that I'm have less expertise on, where it's trying to write into BIOS level. That gets a lot harder to clean up after, because that's very persistent, obviously, being at a much lower level than the operating system. I think any of us who are old enough remember some of the BIOS viruses that were floated around on floppy disks for in the 90s. I know I had plenty of those. They were fun. Fun is a very operative word there. But
I will neither confirm nor deny that I am that old.
Hey, the 90s were fun for this kind of stuff. It was when it was actually just fun and not money. But I think if you have the data, and for a lot of these samples out here and a lot of viruses out there, you have the data, so you know what it did. Like if I pop over to VMware and I can just pull up Git right here quick, as hopefully it's not too slow fashion. If not, I can open up elsewhere. Oh, my time zone in this VM's wrong. Oh, this one doesn't have anything, so we'll do it this way. You can tell I do my analysis in a lot of different locations, and I just rolled this VM back. I remember that now, not that long ago. So that's why I'm like, why is it not on this VM? Often I'll do analysis just on my host because it's a Mac box, as you can see. Oh, that's got some embedded firmware. That's going to be not helpful for my point here. Go away. All right, this is going to be a lot less quick than I was hoping it was going to be, but we'll reopen. Which one of these is it? I think it's this one. Nope, that's not it. All right. Let's see if I can, I'll talk and click here, hopefully. And so once you kind of like start to do the analysis of the process flow and the different pieces of the software, like you know what it did. So you can clean it out pretty easy. You know what to clean out easily. I was going to say easily, but that's actually not the right way of describing it. Malware, and then and where did I have my Git? Okay, I'm going to retract this part of the demo. This will be my demo fail because I don't remember where I stored my project files for this. Oh, wait, here we go. Where's that one? That's it. All right, so now we're going down the tangent of binary reverse engineering here. But so these 3 files are actually 3 are both the loader.bin that we've been going through with all the examples today, and then 2 binaries that are embedded within that loader file. So it actually, the loader expands out either a 32-bit or a 64-bit executable, depending on the operating system, and then executes that, which is what actually runs the malware, that does the encryption, essentially, which I thought was kind of super cool. I have a pretty in-depth write-up about this on my blog, kind of covering kind of all the steps that did. But, if I pop open this loader, the dragon munches for a few minutes, but I have kind of a whole bunch of functions. And was my MW, I have the start of the program. I know basically everything it does within this program to a high confidence level. Knowing which this section I actually just clicked on is where it figures out if it's a Windows 32 or 64-bit process. And that here's the buffers, and then here's the buffers it pulls out from inside the file, kind of how big they are, and then, well, it writes the file and then executes it. So in that, where are we at? That's not it. In this run of it, you see, here's the loader. It ran another file here. That's exactly what I just saw in the code here. Doesn't show the writing of the file, but that's the file that was written to by this section of code right about here. So that's a pretty simple example to answer your question, but that's kind of the view of it. If you take enough time to step through each function that gets executed, that's the kind of stuff you see, and you know basically exactly what it did, and help build it. Again, coming back to indicators of compromise, those sorts of activities, that's where that kind of stuff comes from. Any other questions?
I should have done more homework to know what questions to ask.
Yeah, these are some cool tools, though.
Yeah, I'm happy to and can run through a lot more of this at a different time and give more in depth into kind of the actual reversing side of things. I was aiming at kind of that initial quick hit, let me know what happened, but to get to the deep in depth stuff, you can look at my write-ups. That kind of helps give some background and some view of the outputs of this, but happy to chat. I don't know, maybe hopefully sometime in the future when we can all be in a room and maybe over a beverage of one's choice to go through and talk a little bit more about this.
Oh, someone chatted, it looks like. Hi, Ben, can you share the link to your blog? Would you like to share that, or
Yep.
do we want to post it up afterwards?
Both, actually.
Oh.
So I just typed it into the chat. That's the easy, quick way to get there. benmason.space. And I think the slides should have auto posted. No, or nope, they auto posted in about an hour. But so I actually had a post that went up this morning about a really kind of, well, it's a series of interesting samples that are were .NET compiled binaries, but they had the first one I found was this one that actually posted today, and it was a letter from the WHO. It was right at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. Is kind of hilarious that the WHO is emailing me directly about some urgent information in some sort of English. So I was just perpetually amused by that. But then I found within the file was
You're just that important, Ben.
I guess I never would have thought that I was that important. But attached to it was a file w.h.o.bat, which was even better. That I think is what made it even funnier to me. But when I opened up, I of course found it was an executable file that once I dug in a little bit deeper had a PNG file in it. And I was like, oh, this is funny, and kind of set it aside to look at someday. And then I think it was a couple days later, I got another email with a bank statement, some sort of account statement. I don't remember exactly the wording now because it was bad. But it had bankstatement.bat attached to it that also had an embedded PNG file. So that got me really curious about my first guess that PNG file is probably actually an executable, because when I looked at it, well, here, since I have this up, it looks like this, which just the way it's like a whole bunch of weird dots and things, it looked like an exe file, just really just a best guess at it. Bad steganography at best, but so I really want to understand how that was encoded. What was there? It's a puzzle. So I really found one of the files that was easier to reverse and went down that road and chased it till I was able to write a Python script to reverse it, and was able to then take those same techniques and apply them back to the original software, the original piece of malware sample that I got, the who.bat. I still haven't touched the actual payload that's encoded in that PNG file. I was really just, again, this is my hobby. Again, weird, but I really was really curious how that PNG file was encoded and how to really decode the data in it. So again, that's kind of another example. You can read about that up there, and then the whole write-up about the sample we've been talking about, or I've been using all night for the Ryuk malware sample is this one right here, and it really does talk through, again, you can see some of the taking it apart, how the staging works, the whole control flow of the program I wrote up. So that's kind of really in depth of the whole stepped process through the malware.
Do you happen to have a link to the sample on one of those pages, which I definitely have read?
I do. I actually have links to all of the samples. I think, as I know that's really annoying when scrolling through here. I think I do. Maybe not this one. Do I? Oh, I do. Yeah, it's right at, that's the virus total. There it is. It's right at the top.
Right there. That's easy enough.
Yep. And if anyone, there's a ton of sites out there that have malware samples. Malshare is MAL share, SHARE, is one place that I've gotten a bunch of samples from in the past. If you search on GitHub for the Zoo, THEZOO, I've downloaded it, but it's a repository of malware. I haven't dug too deep into it. Someone pointed it out to me in something I was in recently. I don't remember who, but someone pointed out to me. But it's got a ton of malware samples to start to look at and play with. I will always say be safe. Again, this is all malicious software, so I know I try and be I store it in a place that I know it's at, and that's the place that I don't touch unless I'm actually doing the work or if I'm putting new data in there. But it's kind of fun to run malicious software on a VM and watch it destroy the thing for a few minutes. And maybe if you're using a debugger, you can actually see what it's doing. But knowing the outcomes is actually can be kind of interesting at times.
Well, awesome. Does anyone have any other questions for Ben? Loud silence right there.
Yeah. If you want to reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter or mainsec. I will say mainsec.org if you haven't signed up. It is a Slack team that Curtis has pitched a couple times, but it's a place for collaboration. It was born out of being very tired of having a bunch of Slack channels for all the different groups. It's been a little bit quiet lately, but I would love more conversation for us to all, share and collaborate and have some discussion as a community here of people in various positions in security and if anything, just BS around about whatever we want to talk about. So thank you all for listening to me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben, for doing this. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Yeah, great talk.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Great job.
Thanks, Ben. That was really great.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. We'll let everyone go, I guess, at this point, unless anyone has any sort of an announcement or job postings or anything like that.